side. Ladies and gentlemen, we will start our question and answer session. Please, if you want to ask, just click the raise hand button. We have the facility for the raise hand. And if you want to chat privately, we could also accommodate it. So let me check our chat first. Okay, there's one question from Mr. Jupiter. In the past few years, it seems that the landed housing market is in oversupply, with more young middle-income families preferring apartments instead. Yes, that's true. Combined with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically decreased demand for office and commercial properties, how quickly do you think developers can react to this? And how quickly can we see the Indonesia property sector rebound? Okay, a very good question. What I say in my presentation, it probably rebound in 2022. However, when you ask, yes, the price of property is expensive, it's true. For example, you just got married and you just an ordinary employee, to be honest, sorry to say, you can't afford a residence house in Puri Indah. In Puri Indah, very cheap. It's about 4 billion, and it's the least favorable place. And when you say apartment, yes, people tends to like to live in apartment because it's cheaper. There's someone in there to clean it up, the lobby and something like that, and they just prefer to live in apartment. So a lot of contractors, I believe, in this Zoom also watch from Astra, from SCBD as well. They see the market for the apartment. That's why they build a lot of apartments in SCBD or in Puri Indah as well. And to answer your last question, combine the impact of COVID. It's not true, actually. The COVID-19, yes, it slows down the property market. However, it's only for the private sector, not for the commercial sector. You know, a lot of clients call me, Pak Tirta, I need a land for a supermarket in near Puri Indah. Very lot of demand for commercial unit. However, for private, it's quite difficult in this COVID area. I hope it's answering. Maybe from you, Edward or Johan or Mr. Dian.
I have no comments. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree to Tirta and point out that the landed houses and the apartment market is a very important one, but it got a little bit away with the price development. Yeah, with sluggish situation right now, there's probably no other way for the developers than to lower the prices. And on the other side, the appreciation of an apartment that is large enough that you can walk out of is surely now higher with a continued scenario of work from home. So if you can spend 2, 3, 4 days in a week work from home, then you have a higher appreciation, whereas otherwise many employees would just come home for sleeping, yeah, so to say. So there could be a change, but my personal thinking is that if you compare the apartment unit, if you add them up, then I think there's about 200,000 apartments in Jakarta, maybe 250, if I'm outdated. 250,000 apartments times 3 people, then you see actually the apartment market is very small compared to other major cities. So once the prices go down, I think the occupancy will go quickly up, and people will be very interested in taking on a property like that.
Yes, thank you very much, Johan. Any more question? I don't see any chat here, not chat. Really, no one asked. I think, gentlemen, we are very successful to give a very clear presentation in this webinar. So maybe we could end this webinar if there's no question anymore. And feel free, ladies and gentlemen, to, oh, there's one from Christian. Mr. Nicholas, can you please unmute Mr. Steven Christian? Nicholas, can you please unmute Mr. Steven? Or I can.
Hello,
Yes,
I have a question. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you board of directors for the very informative presentation. My name is Stefan Christian, and I am a student of international relations. And I would like to ask, since I believe it was Mr. Edward, he gave us an overview of the market and so on. I'd like to ask, how significant is a country's flow of markets influence towards government regulations regarding property and so on? Thank you.
Well, that is an excellent question, and one of the challenges with Indonesia is that, as Dr. Paluan has indicated, the difficulty or challenges with looking at the Indonesian real estate market has been non-tariff barriers with regards to purchase, sale, and acquisition. And to your point, and what I talked about, particularly with distressed real estate and banks wanting to move non-performing loans within the real estate portfolio off their balance sheets and find investors who are willing to take that risk on to acquire those portfolios and service them and make a capital gain from their risk is still very challenging. And so what we have is still a very protective market with regards to the ownership and the transaction of real estate with non-Indonesians, and also among Indonesians. And I'll give you an example. In 1998, one of the things we saw, and this was because we had very low penetration of the KPR or mortgage market for property. Most of that portfolio, which was a very small percentage versus today, the banks had forbearance. In other words, they made it a part of their operations not to be too aggressive on trying to enforce or collect their rights with regards to the mortgage. And a lot of that has to do with our present day situation, which is if they classify that mortgage after 90 days of not being serviced or receiving, not receiving payment, it downgrades their portfolio. So they've done, during 98, they did their best to have a degree of forbearance. And again, the mortgage market was very low. On the commercial side of real estate back in 98, it was very significant. We, at that time, PENIDA Capital, had a $4.2 billion real estate portfolio that we were monitoring and managing upon for international syndication banks who had lent to developers into that sector. And so the exposure to property developers with new projects, whether it be in Bali for very large scale resort developments or in Indonesia, which had just begun to develop the commercial apartment or condominium market, was significant. But the thing about property versus other asset classes is that creditors still retain collateral control. And so as long as you have control over that collateral, you have a degree of forbearance or patience to ensure that a restructuring process does take place to allow for cash flows to return. Because at the end of the day, if you're in a situation where the economy is at dire straits, there's very few buyers for those assets unless they're deeply discounted. And everyone is basically calculating what is the opportunity cost to hold or to fold and sell. Well, 22 years ago, there was the Indonesian real estate market, and the laws governing ownership of real estate are pretty much more or less the same they are today. The best you can do is, as a creditor, have a first lien over a property asset as a creditor. And by having a first lien as an asset, all you can really do is find another buyer who's willing to take that over. You will never be able to necessarily take full ownership of it, or at least the risk of taking ownership of it and trying to sell it to the local market in that category. So those challenges still exist. But suffice to say, COVID-19 is a different market. And globalization and the fact that we have from the private equity and the private credit market over $2 trillion seeking opportunities to invest in distressed real estate or non-performing loans does give pause, or at least for Indonesian banks to begin to think, what can I do in my capabilities to reach out to these investors who might have a better idea or the capital to fix up, improve, and take that risk on, and patience, and not dependent on monthly cash flows to meet their tier 1 or tier 2 capital requirements by Bank Indonesia. And so I think this is going to be an opportunity for Indonesian banks and developers to begin to reach out to those private equity investors who are focusing on real estate and apply existing laws and regulations as to how they can structure their participation and provide the necessary capital. And what I mean by capital is not only financial capital, but intellectual capital. We're in this situation. How do you provide the intellectual capital along with your financial capital to either A, reposition these assets, or find a way to fix them up that'll be more attractive to your network of investors, or potentially Indonesians who are always about seeking what is the next trend. So I think in that regards to your question, there is opportunity and scope, but there are also other markets and countries who, as Tirta said in his opening remarks, are making it far more attractive to attract and secure that capital for the exact same reasons. And this is something that I've learned in my 28 years in Indonesia. If you want to get something done here, you have to precipitate a crisis, because only during a crisis does the decision-making accelerate to a point where people understand, okay, I've played my last card. This is the time to capitulate and do what I need to do. So thank you for your question.
Oh, very, very clear, Edward. It's like the last call we done. It's like one podcast, and you explain it again. It's almost like the financial crisis in 2008, the bubble in America. Is it correct?
Right.
Yeah. So if you all know, in America in 2008, there's a bubble because the non-performing loans that I with Edward always discuss, they can't pay the loan anymore. Like for example, what the cashier in Walmart, they have they wanna own a residential in America, and when they apply to the bank, and the bank just came, oh, this is the paperwork, please write your name, and tomorrow it's approved. The bank don't see, they don't do any good due diligence to who are they, who what would they do. They can afford $1 million residence in America. Therefore, the financial crisis in 2008 is very collateral damage, and that's what Edward are very specific and very expert of. Maybe I haven't tell you, ladies and gentlemen, Edward has saved Indonesia in 2000, in 98 and 2007 crisis in Indonesia. He's also saving our economy because he's the senior advisor for the Minister of Finance of Sri Mulyani. He's the boss of Sri Mulyani actually.
Oh, that's saya jadi membantu cuci piring, Pak.
Yeah, everything what Sri Mulyani does is from Edward's mouth.
She's much smarter than me. Saya jadi membantu cuci piring, Pak.
Okay, okay. Is there any more question from the floor, ladies and gentlemen? Ah, yes, I see Aryan. I will ask to unmute.
Hi, Board of Dice. Thank you very much for the clear and very informative presentation. I'm Arlen Hart from Universitas Pelita Harapan, and I'm here to ask a question regarding the revitalization of Indonesian economy in the capital and real estate sector. As we can see, the level of uncertainty in the economy is currently at an all-time high, with the trajectory of recovery is difficult to forecast. And as we see in China, they are actually normalizing everything right now. And this includes digital economy, online entertainment, and most importantly, the real estate technology. Like, investors are still showing strong interest in China's commercial real estate market. While the outbreak may have postponed some deals, other negotiations have been pushed through with confidence from investors, particularly domestic. And most importantly, investors are focusing on the long-term potential. And my question here is, how could Indonesia revitalize its real estate market, and what do the real estate actors could do in revitalizing this economy? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arlan, for your question. Let me start by saying it's quite difficult to predict the future when the uncertainty level is high. It's correct what you say. And with the normalization and the entertainment in real estate in China, and also a long-term partnership. And I believe for real estate, when we were very young, all our grandparents invest in real estate, invest in gold and US dollars. Always hold that three things, okay? Real estate, gold, and US dollars. And in my opinion, the safest is by far that three: real estate, gold, and US dollars. However, these three aspects has been through a lot of crisis, has been through a lot of ups and downs, and has been through a lot of pandemics as well, and they survive anyway. Your question is how to make Indonesia property market rise up, right? As my presentation before, I say the problem about our Indonesia market is we are lacking of foreign investors in Indonesia. Don't get me wrong, a lot of Indonesia's property player, a lot of Indonesia's contractors have a lot of money to invest in Indonesia. However, it's not enough to have the balance of economy in Indonesia. We need also from other countries to support in Indonesia. Therefore, I was invited by a lot of foreign embassy, the ambassador, the deputy head of mission invite me to their event and say, Pak Tirta, can we, for example, Russia, for US, for Singapore, Pak, we want to invest in Indonesia. How, Pak? And I say, it's quite difficult for you as a foreigners to invest, as Mr. Dian has say in his presentation. There's a lot of terms for ownership in Indonesia, and it makes them, for example, like this. You are a Singapore investor. Let's say your name is James. James called me, Pak Tirta, I want to invest in Indonesia. I have 10 billion rupiah. Can you help me? Okay, you can invest in apartments. Wah, Pak Tirta, you say apartment no good lah. I want a landed house. Yes, every time I give a webinar, every time I give a conference, I always say, yes, landed house is the best investment. However, as an expat, it's not feasible for you to own a land in Indonesia, as I say in my presentation before. However, a couple of months ago, I was with Mr. Andrew Howe from CFLD Karawang, one of the manager from CFLD. So CFLD is a company from China, very big company from China. They built land in Karawang. If you know, from exit Karawang, this is KIIC, this is Unilever, and this is his spot, CFLD, 300 hectares. I say, Pak, I have a lot of foreign investors in worldwide. Can you help us to manage how could they invest? Because the regulation is quite difficult in here. And he stipulates that, Pak Tirta, it's possible and it's feasible for foreign investors to own this factory. I say, wow, interesting. What is the secret? It's a partnership with a local PT. So if you own a local PT, it's possible for foreigners investors. You friend up with a Indonesian PT, and you can have an ownership as a PT with a local partners. That's what's my remark. We need more foreign investors to invest in Indonesia. Maybe, gentlemen, you have another remarks to this question?
I'd be happy to answer Aryan's question, and Aryan, thank you for asking it. I would add to Tirta, there are structures and mechanisms in place to address existing laws with regards to property ownership and title. What I think the opportunity is vis-a-vis how does Indonesia become more competitive to China is things that we are involved with that involves the digitalization of real estate assets. And this involves taking the existing process and digitalizing it involving blockchain and being able to grant rights to investors to that title. This is taking place in Singapore, it's taking place in the United States. It's a means and platforms now to raise money that reduces the friction costs associated with sales and purchase and acquisition of real estate assets. We can work this with existing Indonesian laws, particularly with the sense of foreign ownership on a 30-year extendable basis up to 90 or 80 years. That's not really the issue. The issue is certainty. The issue is certainty to be able to have vested rights that the capital you provide will be honored and that the rule of law will be honored with regards to those rights. Indonesia has the opportunity right now to digitize that, to broaden and deepen the market, whether you have $1 million or $1 to invest in property. The digitalization of real estate assets will allow for participation in that, whether you are residing in Tangerang or in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. If you look at the ability to begin to use these platforms that will be able to track, register, and monitor your investment on a fractional basis is where we're headed. And in the United States, what this does and elsewhere, it reduces the friction costs associated with real estate investment and ownership. So Indonesia has that opportunity. I would like to say that I'm optimistic about its adoption, but my experience in Indonesia is that it will wait to see that these technologies are proven in other markets before implementing it here. And that's okay, because in that process, it takes several years to get it right. But as you will learn, that Indonesia is probably one of the world's best traders. And that is, how do I play the ends against the middle to get the benefit? It will not lead in any category, but it does benefit from that strategy. And that is a combination of cultural and demographics, and also just where it lands on the map in the world. So if we can accelerate that process, or we can find a developer who will champion the digitalization of their real estate holdings to offer to a larger market who wants to be able to participate in that, then I think that's the workaround that Ariane, Indonesia can position itself vis-a-vis China or any other large market. So these are exciting times, and I would encourage you to look into the digitalization of real estate assets. And there's a lot of companies out there who are leading the way. And if we can take any of the best practices that they're doing and implement it here, will be a good thing. I think the key starting point of all of this will be to digitalize the deeds and the property titles of Indonesia. And once we can begin to do that, we reduce a lot of the friction costs associated with doing a due diligence review of land titles and ownership. So that would be a starting point. And once we do that, then capital will flow. Right now, what real estate investors outside of Indonesia and credit investors outside of Indonesia rely on is that the fact that banks have done all that homework, and what their efforts have to do with is to appraise and validate and do their due diligence on the collateral value of those non-performing loans. And so that takes time and effort and expense. In other countries, it's more transparent. And so the cost involved and the velocity involved is to their benefit versus a very drawn out process here. So hopefully from an administrative standpoint and ways we can compete with China, that will be able to help. So I hope I have given you some insight and maybe some direction on things that could be coming down very soon in the pipeline.
Thank you, Edward. A lot of banks also register to our webinar. So we are happy to listen to your feedback as well. What's your standpoint? What's your insight? We are more than happy to know your insight as well from the bank expert as well. Maybe Johan, you want to add some more for the closing remarks?
I actually had it in the presentation with a slide, which is Omnibus Law, also connecting to Edward. The question was, I think, mainly asking for what should government do, and ultimately governments are definitely in charge for creating wealth, and then in times like that, making sure wealth is not melting down and people fall and slip back to poverty. So having already a record of more than 7 million recently employed people turning unemployed, jobless, with probably zero chances for applying anywhere except the few healthy industries. I see a big responsibility for the government to think creatively on financial support of housing owners that still have credit to pay, and not to just let them alone and slip into very miserable times. I was last year in October saying, finally, President Jokowi speaks it out and clear and is ambitious to pursue such elements in the omnibus law. Now I have to say it's tragic that he did not start it under his first term already, because now we have a very complicated situation and conflict of interest between investors, users, and so many other stakeholders. We see mass demonstrations announced by labor unions that would be a disaster on the pandemic development, and so on and so on. But I'm optimistic that at least we will see an improvement in job creation and tax omnibus. But this is clearly the task now from my analysis, also when it comes to property, protect the innocent house owners that still have to pay a loan from falling back into misery.
Okay, thank you very much, Johan. Perhaps Pak Dian, last quick word for our final remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rita. Thank you, Sir Edward, Sir Sauter. And I would like just to share about the omnibus law. Actually, we done also research on the omnibus law, and from my point of view, the Indonesian government has not conduct sufficient analysis of the risk-based regulations about the omnibus law. So what we are doing now is we are trying to analyze the omnibus law from the risk-based regulation perspective. Yeah. However, we have not find a channel to express our aspirations about the omnibus law. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very clear enough. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of the event. Please let us know. We will write an email to you to give us a feedback. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Mr. Edward, Mr. Johan, Mr. Dian, thank you very much for being our panelist for today. Maybe Nicholas could take us a family photo together. Please turn on your camera, ladies and gentlemen. We will take a family photo. Are you ready, Nicholas? Okay. Okay. I will do the screenshot. My friend say I should do the screenshot. Okay, waiting for others to turn on the camera. Okay, let's take a picture together. 1, 2, and 3. maybe waiting another participant to join to turn on the camera first so we could take a family picture. Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more time. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your participation. I much appreciate your attendance. I will give a round of applause to you all. And please let us know, give us any feedback. I will write an email to you. And thank you very much from us. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Someone from the U.S. Embassy is on. Come in.
Apa ya? Iya. Oke. Maksudnya kan dia tahu regulasinya ada banyak yang tumbang tinggi, cuman solusinya nggak langsung dipotong semua gitu langsung nggak ada.